Global politicians, hope you're well, hope you're enthusiastic for this week's lesson. So this week's lesson we're going to have a quick look at an article about how COVID-19 could or could not change the sort of world order. You're going to have your topical test for April. We're going to look at our theoretical foundation, capitalism, and basically we're going to review weeks 1 to 7. So it's sort of a bit of a consolidation week where we're sort of taking a stop and having a look at some things that we've already studied and revising them. So activity 1, I posted an article on Google Classroom. It's called "Will Coronavirus Change the World Order?" It's a very interesting article. It's not very long. It's about 3 pages. So read the article and respond to the following points. 1, why does the article say that China will not surpass the US in the near distant future? So what are the reasons it gives why that's not going to happen after COVID-19? It says America is still going to be the dominant superpower. Why does it say that? Number 2, what does the article say America should do after COVID-19? What action should America take? And finally, but maybe most importantly, do you agree with this article? You know, are there points that you disagree with? Why do you think it's realistic, this post-COVID-19 world scenario that is talked about by the author? Okay, so that's posted as a question on Google Classroom. That's an easy way to get engagement. Read, post your reply, and I think every week I'm going to be posting something about COVID-19 to get you to read or comment on. So that's first. Obviously, second, topical test. So the topical test is on Google Classroom, April 2020. Take the test through Google Forms, no cheating. When you get answer feedback, if you got it right or wrong, do have a look at the links, do have a look at the news articles, in some cases videos, you know, do check it out. It's not, it's worth sort of exploring a bit of depth. So now we're going to go on to our 6th and last theoretical foundation, which is capitalism. Now, I'm sure capitalism is something that you have studied in business, that you have looked at in lots of lessons before. It's not a new concept, but we're just going to look at it, the different versions of capitalism. So we obviously know that the economic theory of capitalism is based on the idea of production, exchange, distribution, and consumption. And profit, the generation of profit, is the most important thing. I don't think it's anything new. And there are different models of capitalism that we're going to look at in a minute, but all of them agree that the generation of profit is the most important thing. And if you generate profit, you can have economic growth, you can maintain the global market, and you can develop. So all models of capitalism agree that profit is the most important thing. And neoliberalism, which some of you looked at neoliberalist dependency theory last lesson, is a strand of capitalism that really advocates minimal political influence. So the government should not be involved in the market. It is a completely free market economy, and the market sort of self-regulates itself. And obviously, that's going to come up later in this lesson. So when we talk about capitalism, where does it come from? We normally trace it back to sort of the 17th and 18th century Europe. It replaces feudalism, which I'm sure you've looked at. It's a society that's based on agrarian-based production. People are farmers. They serve the landowner. They grow what the landowner requires. And with capitalism, you have a move towards markets and the idea of supply and demand, generating profit, markets both local and foreign. And this in turn drives technological advances. This leads to industrialization, and in particular, the Industrial Revolution. So this means you have the division of labor, where suddenly you have, instead of all of your population largely being farmers, you now have it divided into what generates profits and what opportunities there are. So suddenly you have a lot more professions. And also your population goes from largely being based in the countryside, because they're farmers, to urbanization, which is where they are based in towns, because that's where factories are, that's where markets are. And also then you start to see the export of capital, which is normally, money, from Europe to the rest of the world, because this wasn't happening before capitalism. So that's sort of where capitalism comes from. So as we said, all models of capitalism agree that the generation of profit is necessary for economic growth. But there are three fairly distinct types of capitalism that are relevant to global politics: enterprise capitalism, social capitalism, and state capitalism. So first, let's look at enterprise capitalism. So this is the idea that the market should be self-regulating, and profit, either short or long term, is the ultimate goal. Your government should not be sort of involved in regulating the markets or really in the economy itself. And this is where neoliberalism comes from. So as a result, your trade unions are quite weak. And where do you find it? The best example of this is the United States of America. They have always been based on enterprise capitalism. The positives of this is it can enable massive economic growth. If you look at America after World War II, it also leads to high productivity because you have increased competition. The downside is you have massive inequality between the rich and the poor, which is why if you look at America, American society, their wealth distribution is very, very different from most other developed countries. So that's enterprise capitalism. Now you have social capitalism. And this is the idea that, yes, capitalism should be looking towards profit, but the types of capitalism should try to benefit society. And profit should sort of be long-term with a view to development instead of short-term profits. And normally with social capitalism, you have some sort of social welfare provided by the government. Germany and Scandinavia is the best examples of this. And there is a lot of crossover between sort of what we call socialism. A lot of people would argue that Sweden, for example, uses social capitalism. Some would argue it uses socialism, but the main points are the same. The positive points, well, welfare is massively reduced, so you have a fairly equal distribution of wealth. And because you have investment in training and education, this leads to long-term development for your country. The downsides, of course, is your market is not as flexible because it is built with long-term goals. And so it's difficult to adapt to the changing economic conditions. And one criticism of social capitalism is that in the age of globalization, countries that have social capitalism have been unable to adapt and compete with the changing market, especially the new markets in Asia. And last but not least, we have state capitalism. So it's the idea that capitalism should be controlled by the government with a strong link between your finance sector and your industry sector. So the government has a much more hands-on approach here. Where is it found? Japan, China, Russia. Obviously, China claims that they are a communist country, but as we've sort of discussed before, this is political. But from an economic point of view, they employ state capitalism. The positives is it can lead to economic growth because you have this synergy between your finance sector and your industry sector. The problem is it often places a very heavy burden on workers with very long hours, and Japan is a great example of this. It's not seen as particularly flexible, and it's one of the reasons why Japan and China and Russia's economies have not grown or not continuing to grow at the rate that was predicted because they're seen as being inflexible. So now you've been taught through that, go on to Google Classroom. First of all, spend some time reviewing the work we've covered in weeks 1 to 7, especially the work we did last week about models of development. Have a look at your infographic, have a look at the other infographics, because there will be questions on all 4 models of development that are on Google Slides. And then when you're ready, take the development weeks 1 to 7 Google Forms quiz. Essay quiz, it's not really a test. It's not, you're not going to get a number score. It's more important that if you get a question wrong, have a look at the explanation, go back, have a look at your notes to ensure you understand, because this is really just seeing how much have we taken in the first 7 weeks. It's quite a long test. Take your time with it. And that's all we're really doing this week. Take your time with especially this Google Forms. It's worth doing properly. And possibly in Wednesday, possibly tomorrow, we will have a quick Google Hangouts call just to see how everyone's doing and how we're getting on. And other than that, have a good week. As ever, I'll be on Google Classroom to answer any questions.